And one of the characteristics of people from Ananda, and I was just looking at Lisa, I was looking at Shanti last night too, that we look like children even though we're grown-ups. There's a childlike enthusiasm about Ananda folk. And also it's because we don't identify so deeply with our bodies in the ages of the body. I've noticed that when the choir is singing sometimes, you can have a 50-year age range sometimes up there. And when people start singing together, you really can't exactly tell who's a child and who's a person close to the end of their incarnation, because the energy flowing through doesn't have any age. Once I had to go to one of our neighbors in Ananda village years ago, and it was when we were trying to do something political, and I was meeting with them, and we were all the same age, and they seemed so much older than me. I mean, really a lot older. I thought of them as I felt like a child, like they were grown-ups. But I realized it was because they lived so much more on the physical plane, that they just were in their bodies in a way. I think they were wearing out their bodies faster also. But they identified with them. And so if that body was 50, there was a 50-ness about their consciousness. Where I think Ananda folk just have this kind of here we are. Swamiji said that about himself since he's been healed. That he says he doesn't feel any age at all. And it's not even merely that he feels youthful. He just doesn't have any concept of age. He's just, I think you would say, you're existing in the now. You have to have past and future to have age. If you're in the now, there's no age because there's no reference point to it. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, I've been watching Lisa all evening and I just kept thinking, she looks about 12. Shanti came back from wherever she was, she looks about 8. She really does. She'll probably get a little tired and begin to look 12, but now she looks 8. I had some reflections on, before I get into the whispers. I spent a lot of time last time, hints to the reader, and I gave away those handouts for which I'm searching because I didn't bring them, but if you didn't get one, we can get you one. That's all right. But I just took it right off of page 9 of the book. But one of the factors about prayer, excuse me, I just really must clear my throat here. I'm thinking of Shanti as a physician who's given me drugs so that I can get over this. Anyway. We catered a party. Friends of ours hired Ananda to cater their party. A reception they were giving. It was an official reception. And Marilyn and Connie and I went. And anything that we do, we just did it up in spades, and it was an extremely beautifully done event. We had so much fun there. Afterwards they said, "Oh, are you professional caterers?" Marilyn says, "Well, she's the minister of Ananda. Connie's a doctor, and I'm a research scientist." No, not actually. We're not professional caterers. But maybe we will be. It's a fallback position in case medicine doesn't work. Okay. Now, back to where we were. One of the biggest issues that people have with prayer is we pray for the wrong things and then we think God isn't listening. And it's a very, very delicate balance. And he says in here, how does he put it? I think he says something about it. But you have to find, he says you have to find the right prayer. Let's see. Maybe it doesn't actually say it right in here. Select a demand, I know what I was going to say. Select a demand from the contents according to your need. Now, when I was saying earlier about this book, it has, as Swami describes in the introduction, it describes every situation that the devotee is likely to face and then explains to us what the right attitude is about it. And Master talks at great length, and I talked about it last week, about how you can't pray like a beggar. Now, one of the reasons that we end up praying like beggars, and this was brought to mind by an interaction I had with someone, is because we fix our mind on something that can never come to us. And we want it to come to us, and the only way we can try to make it happen is we have to keep asking for it, because it's not already part of our nature. Now, in the whispers here, and I'll go over them in a moment, every situation that he brings up, he explains to you how to pray about it. And the prayer is never, oh, please, please, God, make this happen correctly, change this, make it different than it's going to be. I was having a conversation with someone, and that person is caught in a situation in which a lot of other people are behaving inappropriately. And all the people who are behaving inappropriately have no particular awareness that they're behaving inappropriately. They're just doing what they feel like doing. They're not people who have a strong moral compass. They're not people who introspect and think carefully about what's fair. They're people, oh dear, you look so distressed. What do you need? Oh, okay. They're not people who consider carefully the moral position of everybody concerned. They just move through their own selfishness. My friend has a more sensitive nature, and therefore their behavior seems outrageous to him, right? So he's begging God to make these people change completely, right? And there's no context whatsoever for them to change. It's an impossible request. And the only basis for the request is, but I want it that way, right? And the way and just even the very tone of it, you can hear that, can't you? Now, how often do we really just do that? We put ourselves in a position where something is required of us. Often, what's required of us is that we have to overcome something within ourselves that's a limitation, and we don't know how we're going to overcome it. Now, it's quite different to say, Lord, here I am, and I know what's required of me, and I don't have the strength to do it. You're going to have to give me the strength. But you see, we're asking in that case for something that belongs to us, which is the moral strength, for example, to do what we know we ought to do for the sake of our spiritual salvation. Now that belongs to us. To get this person over here to wake up out of their delusion and do the right thing so that their actions won't continue to impact me, we're trying to own something which is not ours by right. I remember, and I've shared this with you, but it's very appropriate here, when my parents were in the last years of their life, and I was having to learn a lot of things that I didn't already know, that I didn't know I was going to have to learn. In my involvement with my parents, I left home when I was 18. I never expected to be so integrally involved with them as I ended up being at the end of their lives. And there wasn't a lot in it for me. I mean, it turned out that there was more in it than I knew, but I didn't have a deep, abiding desire to be doing this. I didn't have like the sense of great responsibility or closeness to them. It was just something that landed on my plate, and there was nothing I could do. I had to do it. So I kept telling God that He should just take them off the planet. I mean, that just seemed to me like, and I was, really praying, just like, how about if they just go? And they just didn't. In fact, my mother, who was very sensitive in an intuitive way, she was not always by any means accurate because reason follows feelings, and her feelings were quite prejudiced. But she was still sensitive. She picked that attitude up from me. And she said, once when I was visiting her, every time I cough, you think I'm about to die. Well, I'm not about to die. There's a lot of life left in me yet, she said like that, which was just absolutely spot on. Every time she coughed, I have to confess, I was hoping she was about to die. I know that may sound terrible to some of you, but it wasn't really terrible. She was very ill and, to my eye, suffering a great deal. But I kept talking to God like He ought to take them off the planet. And it wasn't a righteous prayer, even though there was a piece of it that I thought was righteous because, they were sick, they were old. I mean, it was sort of like euthanasia in a not a very nice way. I mean, like just they're old people. And finally I had to really back off and, number one, really fully cognize these are still dynamic living beings, Just because I think they're old and ill doesn't mean that they think they're old and ill. They're still having their life. And it's not right for me to be determining the direction of their destiny. It was not a righteous prayer. So the prayer I came up with, which actually worked really terrific, and I highly recommend it, was, okay, Divine Mother, obviously they're still learning things, and they're going to live as long as it will be fruitful for them to keep learning. So whatever lessons they're trying to learn, get on with it, okay? And I really started praying, Divine Mother, give them the clarity, the courage, the wisdom, and the receptivity to learn whatever it is that you're trying to teach them now. And I could enter into that because that was a righteous prayer. And it was a righteous use of my energy in the sense that, through all these years of spiritual living, we do have a capacity to channel energy. So I was channeling that, vibration toward them, a vibration of being awake and ready for whatever it is that life was trying to give them at that point, without any further conditions than that. You see the difference between a righteous and an unrighteous prayer. Please make my brother stop being a drug addict. Well, maybe you have to say, my brother isn't a drug addict, but you have to say, Divine Mother, take care of my brother. Be with him. He's your child. Give him whatever lessons he needs. Help him to find a way out of his suffering. However you want to phrase it, but it has to be a righteous request. Otherwise, believe me, you can just pray until your eyes bubble, and it just won't make any difference because of what Master wrote in here that I said last week, if I can find the sections where it is. He says, God makes divine law, and we break that law, and we have the lawful results of our own free will action, and then we pray for God to break his law. And why would he? And even how could he? Do you see what I mean? Because if we've done it, we've gotten ourselves into that point. If they've done it, they've gotten themselves into that point. It is true that grace can come in and help you, and it is true that prayer has a powerful effect. Having friends in divine places, just speaking of my parents to the end, there was a point actually with my mother, and I do think there was a point in which the prayer to take her out of the body was righteous, which was about 10 days before she died, maybe 2 weeks. The Parkinson's went to her brain and she started having seizures, which was, not pretty. And we were in the emergency room with one of those seizures. Going to the emergency room with an elderly ill person, it's a special kind of hell. Although we were sitting in that emergency room once. Let's see, how did my mother put this? And there was a television playing in the emergency room. We were just stuck there for a really long time. And I was just staring at the television, just watching these bizarre programs that I'd never seen before, like this. And after a while, again, my mother, in her insightful way, turned to me and she says, "You look like you just landed here from another planet." I said, "Well, that's not really inaccurate, Mom." I just had such a look of total bewilderment. But in one of those emergency room cycles, she went and she was in this room. She was in this big space, but she was the only one in it, and there were all these curtains around it. And sort of the seizure had passed, and she was all curled up in this tiny little fetal position, just a little hump under the covers like this. And I sat next to her, and I really prayed. I didn't pray, I demanded. I said to all the gurus, and I think they were all sitting around the bed. I mean, I just could sort of see them in the room, although I couldn't actually see them. I could sense them. I said, I've been on the spiritual path a long time, and no matter how you measure it, I've done you guys a lot of favors, I've been working really hard on this path, and I'm not claiming, to be anything special, but I've tried, and you owe me. And you've got to get this woman out of her body at this point. And within 2 weeks, she died. And quite sort of like, just suddenly, she had one of her seizures, she went to the hospital, they put her in overnight, and next morning she was gone. I mean, nobody expected it. Just like that. But I felt that it was definitely related, to that prayer. Or at least Divine Mother told me, okay, it's all right now, that you can do it. So you see, there has to be this, and what that requires, of course, which it always requires, is that we have to be detached from our own preferences. And we have to always see it from God's point of view. That's what is so incredibly difficult. The ego gets so engrossed, we just constantly see it from our own point of view. Heal this fractured family, make these people forgive me, have my, my father's new wife be a completely different person than she actually is, whatever it might be, but it's just not going to happen. And when you go into these whispers, you find just, he just really says really different things. Let me find a couple here. See what this one is. Oh, that was a nice one. Okay, here's one. Demand that through all tests and trials, the love of God may never fade. I mean, that just starts right there, doesn't it? Don't we so often pray that our tests and trials will be mitigated? That's the first thing that we usually pray for, isn't it? But this very demand, here we are, we're in the middle of tests and trials, and he just asks that we be able to hold fast to the love of God. So there's a clue right at the beginning. What is the right prayer? And then this is one of these where, maybe we can pray it sincerely, maybe we have to find another one. O Spirit, I care not if all sufferings come to me. And maybe that's a little too strong. Anyway, O Spirit, I care not if all sufferings come to me, or all things be taken away from me. I pray only that my love for Thee never fade through my own negligence. May my love for Thee burn brightly forever on the altar of my constant remembrance. Now you can see this is a very advanced prayer. It's very interesting to me. Just the other day I ran into someone who used to come here all the time and just disappeared recently. And, he reappeared somewhere. I said, have you been out of town? Where have you been? Oh, he said, I've just been going through a really hard time. And I didn't say what always crosses my mind. That's a reason why you haven't been coming? You see, that's what happens to people. Oh, I'm going through a really hard time. I have to stay home and process. I can't possibly go to satsang. I can't go to kirtan. I can't tell you how many times people tell me that the reason they haven't been around is because they've been going through a very hard time. So a prayer like this, even if it is a little scary to say, O Spirit, I care not if all sufferings come to me or if all things be taken away from me. I pray only that my love for Thee never fade through my own negligence. Because this is a prayer to protect us from that thought form that when times get difficult, it's the time to turn away from the light. So maybe when things are not too scary, we can say it. May my love for Thee burn brightly forever on the altar of my constant remembrance. Now you see that last line we can all give our heart to, can't we? May my love for Thee burn brightly forever on the altar of my constant remembrance. Now, if we were able to fulfill that last line, that our love for God burns constantly on the altar of our remembrance, why would we care whether sufferings come to us or everything else is taken away? Because if we have that love, what have we actually lost? Because everything outside of us is important to us if it affects our inner consciousness. And we are deeply committed to the idea that those things are suffering and therefore must affect our inner consciousness. In his essay here about life as a movie, he says something just like, for the devotee, there's just no place for grief. Just like that. There's just no place for grief. Why would a devotee ever grieve? And he's so just blunt about it. It reminds me when we were doing the Material Success course, I don't know if there's lesson 3 or 4, we've only gone a few lessons, where Swamiji talks about certain psychological blocks may make it difficult for you to be successful, and his advice is get over it. He gave us very little more than just get over it. Meaning like, for the devotee, why is there any reason to suffer? Okay, so that's a pretty good one, don't you think? Okay, here's an easier version of the same thing. This one is called, Burn Thou My Frailties in the Furnace of Trials. But see, once again, the very name of these things is a request. Burn Thou My Frailties in the Furnace of Trials. You see how much courage there is in this book? Now, it's not meant to, and I'm going to go to some of the just purely happy ones in a moment. I love this one. In the furnace of trials, the ore of my life is being purified. And it's kind of fun. Just think of yourself as just a lump of coal or a lump of something in which everything that isn't perfect is going to just melt away. And all that's going to be left is that which is brilliant, brilliantly beautiful and pure. In the furnace of trials, the ore of my life is being purified. The fire of experience melts away all my delusions dross. The fire of experience, that's kind of a neutral phrase. I like that word, experience. So we're in the furnace of life and we're being purified. O divine artisan, burn away all my impurities. Bring out in me the steel of endurance and hone it to a fine edge by deep calmness. Isn't that a nice thought? I mean, if we think of ourselves as, those, I seem to remember those movies where I seem to remember seeing like documentaries in elementary school about the forging of steel. Would I have seen that? Am I the only one who remembers that? I remember these, didn't they, like USS Steel must have put those out and sent them around to the schools because you had all those pictures of these incredibly fiery furnaces and the men in the helmets and everybody's moving in it. It just glows that incredible incandescent red, and then all the steel just goes to liquid. I mean, what an image. So that's the ore being purified. I mean, it's a little scary on one hand, but on the other hand, isn't it gorgeous? I mean, I still remember those. How long ago did I see those? 50 years ago? And I can still see in my mind's eye how that glowed and the incredible power that would make something so solid into liquid. And then it would pour out, and harden again. You know how that is? So the fire of my experience is melting away all of the stuff, all the dross that covers me, all of delusion's dross. And then we ask the divine artisan who's forging us like a piece of jewelry, burn away all my impurities. And then it says, bring out in me the steel of endurance. Isn't that a marvelous phrase? Just hard as steel, the steel of endurance, and hone it to a fine edge by deep calmness. Amazing concept, isn't it? There we are in the fire, but what brings it to a sharp point is the fact that we don't flinch. That, all these things happen, these fires of experiences come, but we just remain calmly centered in the midst of it. Forge in me from the tempered steel of mental balance. Interesting combination, isn't it? Tempered steel of mental balance. Sharp swords of self-control and firm tenacity. So, the tempered steel of mental balance. This is again this not allowing the circumstances of our life I mean, don't always be chasing the circumstances of our life left and right with our thoughts and our feelings. Don't we do that? We just sit there and we just chase them around all day long. Just think about them here, think about them there. I was going to say we follow them, they follow us. We're always just chasing them. We allow ourselves to become mentally unbalanced by the things that happen. So the tempered steel, and also tempered steel, I mean, it's been through the fires of experience. So here we are, the tempered steel of mental balance, forge sharp swords of self-control and firm tenacity. Isn't tenacity a great word? We used to joke earlier when we were younger devotees, we would think, that I would always think of the fact that I had Master by the ankle. I mean, it's sort of like he was trying to get away from me and I just grab him by the ankle. Has anybody ever grabbed you by the ankle? You grab someone by the ankle. For some reason that image always stays with me. And he just can't shake you off, There's just no way he can shake you off. And you just hold on. That word firm tenacity. Because it doesn't, also the wonderfulness about that word is, it doesn't say that you're smart about what you're doing or even behaving well. You're just not giving up. And that's part of what's being asked of us here, is that we not give up. That we just stay calmly centered and not give up. Forge in me the steel, the sword of self-control and tenacity. He calls it a sword partly because tenacity cuts away other things. That's like, oh, why haven't you been around? Oh, I've been having a hard time. No. We use that sort of discrimination to say, I'm having a horrible time, that's why I'm here. I'm doing everything wrong, that's why I'm here. It's the only thing I have left. With the weapon of inner equilibrium, teach me to fight every enemy of distraction, he calls it. With the weapon of inner equilibrium, teach me to fight every enemy of distraction. So we're talking about endurance, deep calmness, self-control, tenacity, and the enemy is distraction. So what this one gives us is we're just walking through all of these experiences that are fiery and trying to do something to us, and we're just realizing that God is just doing what He needs to do with me. I don't need to get all excited about this. I just keep going. Viktor Frankl made a whole psychological school out of what he called the search for meaning. He wrote a very good book by that name. He was a Holocaust survivor, a brilliant young man who was like 24 when the Nazis came into Vienna and took him and his wife and everything away from him. His wife died. He survived. And then he went on to become a psychiatrist, a brilliant psychiatrist, in his theory, having lived through concentration camps, and he was virtually, I think he was one of only just one or two who survived in the whole place he was. He said, you can endure anything if you have some sense of meaning behind it. Just if something makes you feel that this has a reason. I vividly remember this woman coming to see Swamiji in New Delhi. And she just, once I became a disciple, she kept saying, once I became a disciple, I thought everything would get easy. I thought all my troubles would cease. Swami said to her essentially, that was kind of dumb. He was much more kind than that, but essentially it was like, why on earth would you think that? And she just kept saying it over and over. And he kept trying to say back to her, but you see, once you become a devotee, you have a sense of the meaning of what's happening. You realize that there are these egoic delusions that are keeping you away from your true inner bliss, and that those need to be burned away. And so even if you feel that fire, it's not a purposeless fire. There's a meaning behind it. She would have none of it. She never ever heard it. But at the very least, and this is what we always come back to, we have to recognize we're on the spiritual path. We wish to be eternally and totally free. And even if we're fairly cheerful right now, even if we're kind of peppy and bright, compare that to a state of absolute bliss, a state of complete freedom from all fear, a sense of being utterly ageless because one is moved outside of time. And if you can't really sort of say, oh yeah, that's me, then you can just count on the fact that there's going to have to be some changes. And we can even just tell from the simple fact, if we suffer when this happens, anything happens, that's because it's something that we're going to have to face and overcome. Only because on the other side of it is what we're really seeking. You see how, it's not that one doesn't have feelings still or doesn't struggle, but you see how completely it changes it? 99% of suffering, in fact all suffering, is the thought that things ought to be different than they are. It's an amazing thing to contemplate, but the only thing that causes us to suffer, if things are exactly as they're meant to be, and whenever we have a moment even, or a prolonged period of deep inner upliftment, isn't a characteristic of that always that we sense that everything is exactly as it's meant to be. There's a story in my book about Swamiji that was told by Krishnadas. I think, yes, it was Krishnadas. I think he put his name on it anyway. And it was, he was describing an out-of-body experience that he had before he met Swami. Then he was saying that when Swami blessed him for the first time right after he met him, he had exactly the same experience. That was the point of the story. But in this out-of-body experience, he was actually, he received such a severe blow on his head that his soul actually started to exit from his body. And he actually went down the tunnel of light, and he was in the presence of this extraordinary being of light and compassion that didn't have a form or a name, but it was just this being of light and compassion. And as he described it, he said, in the presence of that being, it wasn't even that I was forgiven. He said that when any impulse arose within me other than perfect bliss, it was evaporated. He said it wasn't even at the level of being forgiven, it was just evaporated, as if it had never been, because the only thing that was possible in the presence of that being was perfect bliss. And any sense of self-concern simply didn't fit. So it tried to enter that sphere and was evaporated by that energy. Isn't that just a marvelous image? Okay? So that's, that's what we're talking about here when we're saying just to walk calmly through the fires. Because what difference does it make? In fact, joyfully. Why shouldn't I? Swamiji said that when we were in the middle of the lawsuits, which were so tough, and he was really, really being personally assaulted by people to whom he had once considered his dear friends. His closest, dearest friends were just savaging him. And he sort of rose to the point where he was willing to accept it. And then I think he went away he might have even gone to Hawaii. He just needed to get a break, and he reflected on it, and he wrote back to us. He said, it's not enough to just accept your trials. He didn't say it, but it was almost like Jesus saying, it's not enough to love those who love you. Even the tax collectors do that. It was sort of that kind of energy. It's not enough merely to accept your trials. After all, what choice do you have? This is no big gesture on your part to take what's going to be given to you and say, oh, it's all right, it can happen. He said you have to love them. You have to love your difficulties because they are the instrument of your liberation. If you're imprisoned and somebody comes to let you out, what is your response? You're just overjoyed, aren't you? We're imprisoned in our limitations and our misunderstandings, and these events come to liberate us from that, and we say, no, 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 please, no. I still vividly and darling remember Gary carrying in his little boy Brian, who's now a great big man, 2 years old maybe, and he came up and I was supposed to bless him, and And Gary's carrying him, and he brings him up like all the proud parents do like this. And Brian just would have none of it. Brian starts thrashing in his father's arms, and he covers his forehead so I can't get close to it. And then very loud says, "No, no, no," like this. So much, for the little children. And I mean, it was all I could do just to not burst out laughing. I mean, the whole church was laughing, really. As I sort of chased his little head around for a moment and then finally just gave up. But that's what it is. God comes to bless us. And we cover ourselves and say, "No, no, no. Don't you think that's stupid?" Really. When we're not doing it, it just seems so transparently ridiculous. And that's why we have to practice saying these things. "I care not what suffering comes to me, or if I lose everything, just teach me to love you. Forge thou the sword in the fires of experience." So we say these things over and over again, and then what happens to us is when we want to behave badly, we can't. Swamiji, we're always teasing about things that, wrong attitudes that we might have seriously. Swamiji likes to do that a lot. We pretend to have really bad attitudes sometimes, because then when we're tempted to have them seriously, it's harder to take them seriously if you've been joking about them for a long time. So we can repeat these whispers when we're not being tested. I've shared this story with you, but when I was caught in a big family problem and was at the hospital and was I was being strong for everyone else, and then I just came to pieces in the parking lot, which is where people go, I think, to sit in their cars. And I was so upset, and I was really getting into it, weeping and wailing and just totally off the charts. And this thought just came through me. You've heard me say this, but it said, "Do you think this could be happening outside the will of God?" And I just almost said, "Damn," like that, because I really wanted to be mad. I really wanted to feel abused. I really wanted to feel that everything was unfair. But I was caught. And so if we repeat these whispers, even if they're beyond us, and just get those thoughts really deeply in our minds, then when we are in the fires of experience and we're trying hard not to be calmly centered, it'll be harder because those words will come to us and we'll be caught like that. All right? Here's a very beautiful, positive one. Demand for union with the Almighty. O Father, behold me through the pores of the sky. Isn't that sweet? I loved that picture. As if, sort of God was on the other side. This is a very, the Heavenly Father in the clouds looking down on earth, isn't it? O Father, behold me through the pores of the sky. I was thinking, one of those children's letters from God. Little girl writes a letter that says, "Dear God, I'm going to wear my new shoes to church on Sunday, and if you look carefully, you can see them." And I just had this picture of this little girl, sitting in church, kind of going like this, showing him the shoes. So I have this, it's just so dear to me. "Oh Father, behold me through the pores of the sky. Smile at me through the twinkling stars. Strengthen me through the sun, and calm my feelings through the moon." Aren't those beautiful images? You can go out into nature and you look at the sky, you look at the stars, you look at the sun, you look at the moon. Swamiji writes in the Hindu Way of Awakening, because he's explaining in there about symbols. And he basically says every single thing in creation is a symbol of the divine power behind it. Because this is not the end point. I mean, this is the stretched out bottom of the creative cycle. This is not the starting point. This is the end point. So everything that's here is here because there's a causal version of it, there's an astral version, and finally there's a material version of it. And then there's beyond the causal, there's the creation unmanifested again. And so we are an expression of all those more subtle realities. And everything in this material plane is just a veneer over the deeper truth behind it. And everything that we enjoy and whatever it communicates to us, we're inspired by it because in some way we're penetrating that veneer. And so this really sweet thing, make me unified with the Almighty. Oh, there's the sky. Oh, and let me understand that the sky is like the inside of the bowl of this created universe, but beyond this universe, the power of the infinite in the masculine form, God beyond creation, Divine Mother within, God beyond, the Father beyond. He's looking through at us. And so we can feel, just even in the pure blue sky, this relationship. And it makes this world alive. And so he peers at us through the pores of the sky. Smile at me, and we're asking him to. Behold me. Father, notice me, be with me, make me aware of you. Smile at me through the twinkling stars. So we look up at the stars and we're asking God, relate to me. Bring these natural forces to life with your presence. Don't let them just be dead stars to me. Smile at me. Let me see your smile when I look at them. Strengthen me through the sun and calm my feelings through the moon. Beautiful, isn't it? You just go out in the sunlight and one has a natural affinity for sitting in the sun. And so the sun, of course, is the symbol of the Creator. It's the symbol of the spiritual eye. We think of it as the spiritual eye as a symbol of the sun, but the sun, in all its power, is a symbol of the spiritual eye. So you turn it over. Calm my feelings through the moon. It also just gives us a more uplifted way to just look out. And on the full moon nights when I drive home from here after classes, you just see that incredible orb. And it has that pale yellow glow to it. It's just, isn't it? It's so extraordinary. But it is a very calming because it's subdued and it has that luminous quality. Calm my feelings through the moon. Caress me through the breeze. Master takes everything that the heart really wants. That word caress is such an incredible word. And isn't it like that? The breeze just kind of blows over us like this. Caress me through the breeze. This is number 112. 112. Love me through my love. Love me through my love. That's a very interesting one, isn't it? Love me through my love. I suppose that means the instrument is blessed by what flows through it. When I love others, I'm acting as a channel and your love is coming into me and I'm feeling the power of love by loving. Throb in me through my heart. Breathe thine immortality through this mortal frame of mine. Isn't that a charming thought? Breathe thine immortality through this mortal frame of mine. When a woman friend of mine was dying, she sort of asked me, what do I concentrate on? Do I try to make my body well? And her body was way too far gone to make well. I said, just think about light. Think about light all the time. When you think about your physical body, think about it as vibrating light. When you're moving out of your body, think about vibrating light. Just all the time, just see everything is happening as light. So breathe thine immortality through this mortal frame of mine. It's also such a charming way to think of this mortal frame of mine. It's just a frame just going around the real self, and the breath of life that's coming through is the ageless spirit. Speak through my voice. So instead of just being my own self and my own ego, when the sound of my voice comes out, let it be the Om. Help others through my hands. Use my mind to inspire them. Breathe through my breath. For within this fragile, it says viol, V-I-O-L, vial, it must mean. For within this fragile vial, no, viol It's an instrument, like a viola. For within this fragile viol, thou alone can sing thy complete eternal song. That word surprises me. For within this fragile viol, thou alone canst sing thy complete eternal song. Isn't it also, that's a beautiful thought, isn't it? That even though, let's see, that the whole song of eternity can come through this little instrument if God really works with us. This is a marvelous one for overcoming the sense of puniness, which really afflicts us, doesn't it? We really have a deep sense of puny a lot of the time, of just not having the moral fortitude or the mental strength to actually be lion-like. So this one become very small, and it ends that way. For within this fragile viol, thou alone can't sing. I can't say it properly. Thou alone canst sing thy complete eternal song. I'm too little without you. So let me read that again because it's so beautiful. Demand for union with the Almighty. Every word, you stop and think. So Master says in this that words are like, let's see, the words of these poems are like a drunken person who can't quite articulate what it is that has inebriated him. And so he knows that he's drunk with the wine of what he's been drinking, but he can't really explain what that wine is. So these words are inebriated with the divine bliss and permeated with them, but they can't quite articulate it. We have to penetrate behind them. So even, like little words become so beautiful, like the word Almighty. Especially, this ends with this fragile self, but we're talking about the Almighty coming through it, which is, it's a nice way to be humbly powerful. Demand for union with the Almighty. This is 112. O Father, behold me through the pores of the sky. Smile at me through the twinkling stars. Strengthen me through the sun. Calm my feelings through the moon. Caress me through the breeze. Love me through my love. Throb in me through my heart. Breathe thine immortality through this mortal frame of mine. Speak through my voice. Help others through my hands. Use my mind to inspire them. Breathe through my breath. For within this fragile viol, thou alone canst sing thy complete eternal song. That would be a wonderful one to just memorize and repeat all the time, wouldn't it? Just something just like whenever your mind is uselessly sitting there. Because it has both power and simplicity and practicality, help others through my hands, use my mind to inspire. So it really just, in a very interesting way, puts you in relationship to everything that happens. Marvelous. Okay. Do you have any questions or comments before we go on? Should we take a short break and then we'll come back? Okay, let's take a short break. Okay, do we have any questions or comments or thoughts about things? Anyone?
I do have a comment.
Okay.
And it has to do, it really doesn't have to be recorded.
Well, it's only that the people who listen to these
Oh, okay.
on the internet don't like the big sort of gaps where they hear something murmuring. It annoys them.
All right. We have been listening to Samadhi, the CD that you gave us, the
Good.
15 copies and over. And it's just a suggestion that if this happens to be redone or edited in some way, shape, or form, it can be done in a responsive manner.
There's a pause in between?
A pause so that we would have a chance to literally repeat the line.
I see.
It's just a method of
No, that's a very good
memorization.
idea. Actually, all we did was take Swami's recording of reading that in his audio book of the Bhagavad Gita and just repeated it for you over and over. I think it wasn't meant so much as you're describing. Here's another way of memorizing it. We can talk about samadhi for a few minutes, which is what I was thinking of talking about. Joycey, somebody back east, came up with this idea which is called 45 days to samadhi. And I guess there's 45 lines in this. And what she was doing, and in fact, if any of you want to participate, you can email Joycey. This woman took it upon herself to email everyone who asked one line of samadhi every day. And then you were responsible for learning that line. That was a sort of a fun way to do it. So she said we should start 45 days before Master's birthday, which is a little too late now, but I was going through the poem Samadhi just mentally before I came here. And it's like so many things of Master. It's very interesting that he himself specifically said, you should memorize this poem and you should say it every day. And you should say it with sufficient deep concentration that the state of consciousness described there becomes your own. Now, the state of consciousness described here is really extremely elevated, but the power of that consciousness is in these words. It's really an amazing thing when you really just start saying it. And the thing about this poem, and I mentioned last week just jokingly, I said learn it before the Christmas meditation, it'll get you out of a lot of tough spots. If you find yourself, whenever you're meditating, whether it's the long meditation on Christmas or any time, if you have this poem or other memorized things in your mind, but this poem especially, if one just starts repeating it with sufficient mental discipline to hold yourself on the words and not repeat it while you're letting whatever other tapes are playing, to not be distracted. You just start. Vanished the veils of light and shade. I was commenting somewhere along in here, I've known this poem for so many years, and I just noticed just a few weeks ago that he doesn't say light and darkness, he says light and shade, because there's only light and then that which blocks the light. So vanish the veils of light and shade. Just what would happen if the duality just vanished? And it doesn't even say like gradually diminished or hidden for the moment. It just is vanished. Vanish the veils of light and shade. And again, every word, the veil. It's the duality of the light and the shade that makes it impossible for us to see the one truth behind it. So when that veil vanishes, well, then what happens is lifted every vapor of sorrow. That all of our suffering is because there's this veil over our consciousness, and instead of seeing God's hand behind everything, we see this likes and dislikes. Everything is likes and dislikes. I guess what must have been at Sunday service, we were talking about how, all of the saints feel that it's all just wonderful what God has done with this planet. And all of the people who are caught in the ego have so many complaints about it, because we're trapped behind the veil of duality, and the saints have seen to the other side of it and lifted every vapor of sorrow. I love this one. Sailed away all dawns of fleeting joy. That word fleeting joy. I mean, this is just such beautiful poetry. And every time I say that line, I sort of see these ships going over the edge of the horizon. They're just gone. They sailed away all dawns of fleeting joy. And there's so much, gone the dim sensory mirage. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and to get anywhere from El Paso, Texas, you had to drive hours over this featureless flat desert. And the mirage of featureless flat desert is that it always looks like there's water on that asphalt road. I can just, for endless hours as a child, we would stare at that, and urge my father, Daddy, Daddy, drive faster, and this time you can catch it, and he would dutifully speed up a little, but he could never catch it, of course, because it was a mirage. But there's the dim sensory mirage. In other words, it appears to be one thing, but when you get up close to it, it's not what you think it is. It even calls it dim. And Master talks about how, Swamiji has talked about this a lot too, when people ask what the astral world is like. He said, oh, it's just the same as here, but so much more vivid and so beautiful, because matter just dulls everything down. Because it's all had to come through so many filters, it's gotten so gross by the time it gets to here. So the dim sensory mirage. And then he just describes love, hate, health, disease, life, death. Just like everything that life's made out of. Perish these false shadows. These are just shadows on the screen of duality. Love, hate, health, disease, life, death. Perish these false shadows on the screen of duality. These are very just straightforward ideas. This is not like somebody talking about the 12th lavender ray and when you finally, transition through the so-and-so. This is just simple words, but perished these false shadows on the screen of duality. Remember as children how you used to get in front of a shadow and you'd make the little, things like this and make things happen? Okay, we used to do that. You still do it, right? But it's like you can make these big shadow figures and all this adventure can happen. But these are just the false shadows on the screen of duality. And you say that to yourself often enough, and then some intense emotional moment comes to you, and it crosses your mind that this is just a false shadow on the screen of duality. It's very, very hard to commit yourself with the same passion to your ups and downs. I know I've shared with you before, but it was such a wonderful moment for me when I don't remember what discouraged me so much, but I was lying on the bed and I was weeping in pity for myself, and the thought came to me, when you're done here, you're just going to get up and go on with your life. Why don't you just get up now? And I just got up. Just like, this is just such a waste of time. And that's what happens after a while. It's not like spiritually advanced people, have to work so hard. It's just, you just can't get into it in the same way. It's like, what is the point? And when you have images in your mind, perish these false shadows on the screen of duality, gone the dim sensory mirage, even if you're tempted, even if we fall. Nonetheless, those phrases will come back. Sailed away all dawns of fleeting joy. And you say, goodbye, good riddance, like that. And then he starts listing them out. Waves of laughter, scillas of sarcasm, melancholic whirlpools, melt in the vast sea of bliss. Melting in the vast sea of bliss. Laughter, sarcasm, melancholy. Just at the end, it's just water moving. Waves of laughter, scillas. I looked that word up when it has just some movement of water or spinning. Whirlpools. You look at each one individually and you think it has an independent reality. But you realize they're just movements of water. And in the end, they just melt back into the sea. Then this is the storm of Maya. And here we are living on this ocean, and what's happening? There's a storm. Maya just stirs up this incredible sort of adventure. The storm of Maya is stilled by the magic wand of intuition deep. And then he warns you, the universe, forgotten dream. We've forgotten now, we've woken up from it and it's just fading away, subconsciously lurks, ready to invade my newly wakened memory divine. I love that. Every time I say that one, I sort of sense it subconsciously lurking. What a phrase, isn't it? And it's ready to come back in and interrupt us. Because I live without the cosmic shadow. This line is always so confusing. Dambara actually spelled it out finally. I live without the cosmic shadow, but it is not bereft of me, as the sea exists without the waves, but they breathe not without the sea. Now the way Dambara explained that, which I'd never considered, I live without the cosmic shadow, but the shadow has ceased to exist because the infinite is no longer supporting it. I think that's how he put it. He says, but it is not, is a whole phrase by itself. I live without the cosmic shadow. The infinite I, that's what it is. The I there is the infinite. The infinite exists without the shadow of duality. But the shadow of duality has ceased to exist because it is bereft of me. I'm not sure that's accurate, but that's what he says, because none of those are, the me is not capitalized. But anyway, the point here is, as the sea exists without the waves, but the waves breathe not without the sea. And just those two lines. You see, when you're meditating and you think, as the sea exists without the waves, but they breathe not without the sea. And there you are, just sitting there in your meditation, and you realize, I'm just a wave on that sea. That the sea is always there. It's not, I'm not like I think I have this independent existence, but I don't. If I weren't one with the cosmic ocean, I wouldn't be here at all. And all of those over and over again pictures of that wave going up, trying to be its own independent thing and getting so excited about everything. And then behind it all, there's just this ocean moving. It's so extraordinary. And then we go into the lists. This is my memories. This is the section now where it turns into lists. Dreams, waking, states of deep turiya, sleep, present, past, future. No more for me. I love the way that one sounds. No more for me. But ever present, all flowing, I, everywhere. When our sense of self is expanded to the infinite. Then more lists. Planets, stars, stardust, earth, volcanic bursts of doomsday cataclysms. That's a really good one to remember when we begin to become anxious about what might happen to us or happen to the world. Master writes in the essay in this book about life as a motion picture. He talks about, he said, periods of peace and prosperity always alternate with periods of great difficulty. It's just the nature of the planet. You have 30 years of peace, and then you have 20 years of war, and then you have 5 years of prosperity, and then you have 15 years of depression. It's just the way it always is. It's always the shadows of duality. It's always playing like that. Volcanic bursts of doomsday cataclysms, creation's molding furnace, glaciers of silent X-rays, burning electrons, floods, thoughts of all men, past, present, to come, every blade of grass, myself, mankind, each particle of universal dust, anger, greed, good, bad, salvation, lust. I mean, it's just like, whoa. I swallowed. Swallowed. Just think how enormous the consciousness is. I mean, he just goes everywhere with that. Doomsdays, planets being formed, electrons, all the thoughts of all men ever lived and ever will live, every blade of grass, each particle of universal dust, these huge, enormous human qualities, is just building to such a crescendo. I swallowed. And it's the I we're speaking is me, my consciousness. Just takes it all in, transmutes it into a vast ocean of blood of my own one being. The blood is the life force. It's just an ocean. I don't think he means a bloody ocean like a bleeding kind of energy. It's the blood in that sense is like the body and the blood of Christ. The body is the Om and the blood is the Christ consciousness. The ocean of blood is the life, the living life force, the life-giving force is what that ocean of blood is. It's not a gruesome image. Into a vast ocean of the blood of my own one being. That's what it means. Then we have this darling phrase, smoldering joy oft puffed by meditation. I always see myself, especially when I'm meditating, it's just this tiny little puny, restless little devotee. Smoldering joy oft puffed by meditation, just trying so hard to just like build it into something. And it's smoldering so it's smoky, blinding my tearful eyes. It's just like I'm trying so hard, but it's just smoky and I can't see anything. But then it bursts into immortal flames of bliss. Isn't that marvelous? It's not completely hopeless. It's going to happen. Burst into immortal flames of bliss. The contrast there. And then it consumes my tears, my frame, my all. Thou art I am thou, knowing, knower, known as one. It's all over the vast ocean of blood of my own one being. And then I help always remember that right after the word one comes the word tranquilled. Because if there's only one, there's no duality to be nervous about. As one. Tranquilled, unbroken thrill. Eternally living, ever new peace. So after all of that anger, greed, good, bad, salvation, lust, I swallowed all in this vast ocean of blood. And then at the end of it, tranquil, unbroken thrill. Our whatever positive we ever develop, it's always cracked because something happens. But this is unbroken thrill, eternally living, ever new peace, enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy. If Master had never written any other phrase except that one, enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy, samadhi bliss. Fabulous. Okay, we'll stop there. That's the first time he introduces the word halfway through the poem. All right, I think that'll be us for tonight.